Hi, this is Catherine, and welcome back to Taking Tea with Catherine. I am drinking Harney & Sons Tower of London tea again. Again, because I do drink this a lot on this channel. But why? Because I like it, because it's one of my favorites. And it's very much in keeping with the theme of my favorite books of 2019. Favorite reads, basically. I'm not talking about favorite releases. If maybe one of these books came out this year, I'd be surprised. Doesn't mean I don't read books that were released that year. I do, but the majority of books I read are what they call, I guess, backlist or classics, even. So yeah, this is not about releases or anything like that. These are not prizes. But I have selected out of the over 80 books that I've read this year, I have selected 10 books, 5 of nonfiction and 5 fiction, because I thought that was fair. And I am definitely trying to keep on in the habit of reading half nonfiction, half fiction, although I'm not going to go crazy sticking to that rule, because we got enough things in life to make us crazy. Another thing that I did not include in these books, because they would probably just knock out the favorites altogether, are rereads, because when I reread a book, it's almost always because it's a favorite of mine and I just want to go back to it. And we had some wonderful readathons, challenges, etc. this year that I participated in since I joined in June. The first one being the Jane Austen July, which was wonderful, and that means I read 2 Jane Austen books again, and of course those would have supplanted almost all the books in my list, so had to leave them off. And then of course I also remember reading The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes in October for Victober, a big favorite of mine. So I wanted to be fair and give the new to me books a chance. So let us start with the nonfiction. And one of the things that was a bit of a, I don't know about disappointment or dismay or just not something I was hoping for, is that out of these 10 books, a big portion of them are books that I borrowed from the library. And again, I'm not discouraging borrowing books from the library. I encourage it very much for people who want to read books. I'm just saying, according to my own personal goals, I wanted to read books that I owned. I wanted to read the books that I already owned. And I ended up not only accumulating a lot more books this year, a lot, compared to the previous years, but I still kept on reading a lot of library books, and in that case, that becomes a bad habit. So let's see in 2020 if that'll change, but we can't do anything about this now. So let's read these 5 nonfiction books that I quite liked. And the first one is called Rush, no semis here. Revolution, Madness, and Benjamin Rush, the visionary doctor who became a founding father. Oh, it says Doctor Who in there. No wonder I liked it. By Stephen Freed. And this book, I think, came out last year, so it is a pretty new one. And, there's not a lot of biographies out there on Benjamin Rush himself. I'm sure there are a few that exist from before this. I'm not an expert on every single biography that existed, and I'm definitely not an expert on Benjamin Rush. However, though I didn't do well in school in American history, I have always been a little bit interested in the lives of the founding fathers. Obviously, the Hamilton thing, as you can see in the back of me, I have 2 founding fathers right behind me. I have Hamilton and I have John Adams, which I haven't actually read the John Adams yet. I do plan to. But I was always interested in, well, not always, but I was interested in Hamilton since I think the 90s. And of course George Washington's interesting enough, I guess, and Thomas Jefferson is fascinating. Benjamin Franklin, we grew up on these things. One person, though, who was not mentioned much, if at all, in school that I remember, was Benjamin Rush. It might be different in Philadelphia. I think he's very much more recognized there. And he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and obviously, if you look at the signatures, not every name is recognizable. But still, he was kind of, I wouldn't say a big deal, but he was a deal back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He's considered a founding father. The only reason I knew about him growing up was because my family, a small line of my father's family had been in the United States since, I guess, before the Revolution and during the Revolution. A relative of mine had done some research, and she never had it proved, but there was a family rumor, because some of, they were not just in the United States, but in Philadelphia as well. There's a family rumor that we were somehow related to Benjamin Rush. And again, not proven. I've actually looked at some of his descendants and ancestry, well, his descendants really, and I have not seen a connection. But nevertheless, it was fascinating to me growing up, so of course I always wanted to know a little bit about him, and I never really read that much about him anyway, but I encountered him in books, like when I read the book about Hamilton, even though it's not mentioned in the musical, the hip-hop, lovely musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda, which is great, but obviously he can't put everything in there. There was a whole bit in there about Benjamin Rush. And I don't know if you could make a whole play or musical about Benjamin Rush, because his life was interesting, but I just don't know if it was worthy of that. But, if someone wants to have a go, it's not going to be me. Essentially, he was a doctor and a writer, and educated man. He was friends with a lot of the other founding fathers. He seemed to have been an influence on some of them. For instance, he seems to have been someone who encouraged Thomas Paine to publish Common Sense, which was, an important piece of literature that I've never read. But yeah, so that's something I didn't know before. And to me, he was a doctor, during the Revolution, so he saw things. He had a run-in with George Washington because apparently he said something about him that got back to him that wasn't meant to, and so there was a bit of a rub there. During a later time, when there was a yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia, he had theories, but, nothing he could prove as to how it came out, how to treat it. And somehow he ran up and, had some problems with Alexander Hamilton with regards to this. And, so there's a whole deal there. But to me, what was more fascinating was his interest and somewhat pioneering studies on mental health. Because, back then, there was very little known. And even now, people are just coming up with names for things and how to treat them. And we still don't know what we're talking about, really. But he was very interested in treating people. He had a personal interest, as one of his sons had to deal with things. So I found that cool, and I also like the fact that he was very much against slavery, because a lot of the founding fathers, even if they were nominally not a fan, they used to have a ton of them. There was a possible one apparently slave that could have been traced to Benjamin Rush's family, and that's about it. His own personal family with his wife and kids. And that's it. But he was he wrote a lot against it. He had a very much about people being equal and even opportunities for women that not everyone would have agreed with. He wasn't obviously, he was a modern thinker in a sense, but he wasn't obviously time period now, maybe not exactly the same. But still, I found a lot to, I guess, admire in him. And I thought it was a good, well-written book, well-researched, and about time. I would like to read again. I would like to get a copy of it. I still can't find an affordable one, so we'll see. Okay, I've talked a lot about this book. So I'm going to go a little bit into two books that I read that were also nonfiction during Jane Austen July, or thereabouts. One was Jane Austen, A Home by Lucy Worsley. I liked her writing enough so that in a very recent haul, actually upcoming haul, because I haven't done the nonfiction bit, I have another book that I bought of hers and am looking forward to reading, because I think she's chatty, that's the word. Chummy isn't right. Chummy, where is that coming from? Anyway, she's a conversational writer in the sense that you feel like you're talking to her, and I like that, but also a good historian, so, I enjoyed this biography of Jane Austen. Very good one. I've read a number of biographies of Jane Austen, and it's up there with one of my favorites. What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullen was more about themes in Jane Austen and just questions that you may ask. Are there people who never spoke a word in, characters that feature heavily in Jane Austen but never spoke a word? And stuff like that. And what does age matter, and what is, was it, death and everything. Just a great nerdy book about Jane Austen, and another book I would love to have. Here's a book that I actually own. Someone actually gave this to me, so I had it for a while and said, I want to read this. And I finally read it, and oh my goodness. Wesley the Owl by Stacey O'Brien. It's written some time ago, not ancient, obviously. It's just a memoir of this lady who she worked with birds and stuff in California. I think it's in California. And this bird, because, she discourages people having any kind of birds like owls, for instance. Same could be said, I guess, for foxes even, as pets, just taking them in or buying them or breeding them that way. That doesn't work. But to have them as pets when they, something happened to them, they got injured or somehow they were separated from their family and this is the only way they can survive, then this is the kind of thing that comes into play. So it's just her experiences raising like this adorable, look how cute this owl was when it was a baby, but even when it got older, it was cute. But this is a bird of prey, so feeding it was an adventure that I could never take on. Just learning how to communicate with Wesley, just so interesting, so fascinating. Yes, gross sometimes, but so made me want to read even more, because I read the occasional nature book, but made me really, really get into wanting to read more. And I have acquired quite a lot of bird books lately and animal memoirs, and am looking forward to reading even more. And I have read more since I've read this one. So, oh yes, you could find this. I think you could find this book either online or in used bookstores, probably for a reasonable price. So, or probably at the library. So, definitely recommend this one. And then, of course, I mentioned this very recently, Infused by Henrietta Lovell, which is a book about tea and about her travels with tea. Different countries that produce tea and different restaurants that she provided tea to, and her interests and her business, and the history of tea comes in there too. So of course I love this book. There were a couple of things I didn't like, because I will never like everything about a book, like how she just tries to get Catherine of Braganza out of the picture as someone who brought tea into England. And I mean, maybe it's right, but don't take Catherine of Braganza away from me. And even Anna, Duchess of Bedford, not, kind of like downplaying a little bit of her involvement in the whole, introduction of afternoon tea. I think that was part of the book. Yeah, I know I didn't make that up. So, there were things I could say, oh man, did you have to? But otherwise, excellent book. Excellent book. And because I really need to kickstart my reading books about tea again, it was a good way to really start, because I did start another book and it was a little slow going. So this got me a little further down the road, Now we're in fiction. And first one is a book that I actually had taken out of the library. I'd seen it there as a staff favorite or whatever, and checked it out. And then I ended up buying it online because I liked it that much that I wanted to keep it in my collection. And that is Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine. And of course she's not. Will she be? No spoilers. But it's just about a woman in Glasgow who has this job that she's had forever. She basically does the same thing all the time. She doesn't really function well with other people, so she has a very solitary life. She has a really weird relationship with her mother. She becomes fascinated with a musician and sort of stalks him, so she doesn't know what she's doing in a lot of ways. My bangs are really going crazy. They're going rogue on me. I just, this is what happens. And just kind of messed up, but, she ends up helping assist someone who got into trouble, who got hurt on the street, alongside her coworker, and so she becomes friendly with not only the family of that man who had been injured, but also the coworker. And so suddenly she becomes, slowly but surely, I guess you could say almost integrated into society and learning a little bit how to love in a way. It's not a love story per se, but ups and downs happen and some surprising things to me happen. There are some references to Sense and Sensibility, which is one of my favorite Jane Austen books. So it's hard to explain, but considering her name, you may get an indication. I won't say any more. I loved it. I did cry a little bit. I don't weep when I read books usually, at least rarely. But some cat books have done that to me. Oh my goodness. But I'm not one to usually cry. So if I even get a little bit choked up reading a book, then it to me was a good book, or at least a devastatingly good book. This is kind of like that to me, but also not necessarily devastating in the sense of that, oh my goodness, you know? So I just loved it. It was one of the few new novels, newish, a couple of years old, I think, that have really resonated with me. And then A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Towles? I don't know how to pronounce his last name still. I should really look it up. I have one of his other... I'm going to come out of the camera now. Bye. Oh, where did I put his book? It is called... Oh, well, too late. You guys know what I'm talking about if you like this writer. He's got another book out about New York, I think in the 30s, and I can't remember it now. Anyway, I have that too that I recently showed in a haul because I like this book so much that I needed to also get a hold of his next, or actually his previous book, I think. It is escaping me. Anyway, doesn't matter. Gentleman in Moscow was about a man who was of the aristocracy, I guess, in Russia, and then after the Russian Revolution, he finds himself in kind of like a house arrest, like don't leave or you'll get shot. And yeah, so, but he's not stuck in a little cottage. He is living in a hotel, and it's a very, very nice hotel with beautiful restaurants, etc. So he gets involved with the people in the hotel. I mean, they knew him already, but he gets further involved in the running of it. Not that he runs it, but he helps, I guess. So it's just the life of the people in the hotel and people who come to the hotel and how he interacts with them, basically. It's a great story. Great story. It was a book club pick. My book club that I'm in picked this out. I didn't pick it, but I'm glad that we had it. So I'm pretty, grateful to that. Okay, I had to look it up. Rules of Civility is the other book that I'm dying to get into, and I just have it, and I will. But next, The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. So, I've read Agatha Christie before. I read at least one or two Poirots in the past. I read a good number of Miss Marple. So I've always considered myself an Agatha Christie fan, and I've seen a lot of the adaptations, at least the ones on television. But I really realized that I had to get into reading it, not in perfect order, but in decent order, and I thought the first one may not be great, because not always, like, A Study in Scarlet by Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes is one of my favorite stories. He's one of my favorite writers. I don't love A Study in Scarlet. I like bits of it, but I don't love it. I love this book. I don't think it's probably going to even be my favorite Agatha Christie book, but I still loved it. I think it had all the quintessential Poirot bits, down to, his weird kind of OCD habits, and then his gathering everybody together to perform his, I figured out who did it, and I'm going to accuse everybody of something, and then I'm going to tell you who really did it. Excellent. Has Hastings in it. Does it have everybody? Is Inspector Japp in here? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Has Hastings, because that's, he's kind of like, he thinks he's a sort of Watson to Holmes, He's not really, but he is also. I don't know. He also kind of fancies himself as Sherlock Holmes himself, so it's kind of hilarious. I like this book a lot. I'm not going to go into what it's about. I want you guys to read it for yourself. Get started with Poirot. Do not wait. That's obnoxious, right? And then, of course, another book that kickstarted me back into another author that I like a lot. But sometimes you just get busy reading other books and you find yourself forgetting how great someone was. And then your sister keeps talking about this author. And then other booktroopers are talking about this author. And then you're like, Bigtober's coming. Let's do this. Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope was excellent. It was my favorite book, barring the Sherlock Holmes. In October that I read. It went on forever, but it didn't feel like it was going on forever, which is, to me, an indication of a good big book. The characters were interesting enough. Some of them were silly, but most of them were amazing. And it made me want to read further into not only the Palliser novels, but all the rest of Trollope's books. And, just like I'm planning to do a lot of Bronte in 2020, I'm planning to do a lot of Trollope, if possible, in 2020. So yes. The last but not the least was Tombland by C.J. Sansom. I guess like Ransom. I've read this series of historical mysteries for a number of years now, and obviously they've been written for a number of years now. It's Tudor era mysteries, starting from around about when after Anne Boleyn was executed, and this man, Matthew Shardlake, is a lawyer who works for Thomas Cromwell in the beginning, and he has a disability wherein he's like a hunchback, and that gives him some amount of pain, but he can still basically function and move around. And he's an excellent, attorney. He's very smart, kind of a self-made-ish man, caring person. I don't know if he's an exact, replica of a person of the times, but it doesn't matter because it's such a good book. He finds himself constantly investigating murders. He doesn't even go in to do that. He just somehow finds himself doing that when he's about his lawyer duties. And so this book, Tombland, is the most recent one. It came out, I think, last year, but in America, I think it came out in 2019, United States. And it takes place mostly in Norfolk, England. And there was a rebellion called Kett's Rebellion, in which some people rose up against wealthy landowners who were doing an enclosure issue where they were fencing up a lot of land so that the common people couldn't graze, and then they were taking away the land from the people. And you don't mess with people's lands. So there was a rebellion. Obviously, if you read history, it didn't work out, but it was an important thing at the time. And what happens is Matthew Shardlake finds himself investigating a murder on the behest of Princess Elizabeth, because at this point, her brother Edward is the King of England still, and they had, the Protectorate of England, that time period. And so there's a relative of Elizabeth's, somewhat relative of Elizabeth's, who is murdered. And so it's a very delicate issue. So he's going up to ask questions, and, he runs into people that aren't great. And somehow he gets swallowed up in this rebellion. So, he may agree with certain things, but he's not really a rebel himself. But he just finds himself in the middle trying to survive, basically. And, yeah, it is a very long book, but again, it's like the Trollop. If you like to read long books and you also like books that keep you going, this is one of them. I could say maybe there's a few chapters that could have been a little bit shorter, but I still think it's one of the best books I read this year, and just amazing, and sad at bits, of course, because anything with history, especially that time period, the Tudors are just such a mess, but so fascinating, actually a lot of history is fascinating. So those are my favorites. Agree, disagree, let me know in a nice way, but if you agree, feel free to subscribe, because these are the kind of books we talk about a lot. I try to read a lot of mystery, history, classics, memoirs, and so if, you want to see a little more of that, there you go. This has been Catherine from Taking Tea with Catherine. Hope you've had a wonderful reading year and a wonderful year of tea taking, and more to come. Bye.